death of one person and then asked me if I knew Henry Marshall. Please bear in mind that Estes' remark was uttered to Mr. Tucker in October of 1961, 6 months before the Marshall suicide-homicide controversy would reach the public domain. Was his comment an innuendo, an indication that Marshall had been murdered? Was his question an insinuating threat? Perhaps it was both. Tucker was positive that Estes had threatened to embarrass the Kennedy administration if the investigation was not stopped. One must at least question if such resentment, animosity, and fear led to Dallas. Estes' autobiography offers a different viewpoint. On October 18, 1961 exchange, Tucker was not receptive to our requests. I saw reason he was not going to accomplish our goal, so I reversed field. I told him I was prepared to go back to Texas and bring a team of public relations specialists back with me. We would publicize their treatment of me as a vendetta against my beliefs in my church. I told him my political friends would see he was hung from the highest tree in Washington. Wilson Tucker would later say I had threatened him. I was only negotiating with him. Well, Billy Celeste's idea of negotiating and your idea of negotiating might be a little bit different. Okay? Billy used to say to me several times, some people need killing. Okay? So, he threatened this guy, and he's saying, we killed one guy already. And what are you going to say? He had nothing to do with this business? Please, you'd have to be an idiot to think there's nothing to do with this. Although, well, I'm going to do it. I'll do one more. I wrote this years ago, and I read it to my best friend Rick over the phone before I came down here. And he said, you used that down there in Dallas. So I added a few things. Now, you're not going to catch all of this because you'd have to really be knowledgeable about the whole Johnson story. And I heard, as I could see tonight, some of you are not familiar with a lot of it. But I think you'll get the idea. This is from a chapter called LBJ, Master of Misdirection. And through the years, he accused just about every group and agency, or speculated, maybe that group killed him. Maybe this group killed him. And all he was doing was red herring it. He was just keeping himself out of harm's way. Now, I go into great detail for pages on each one of these. Here I'm just summarizing. Okay. He also said that John Kennedy was such a jerk, he was killed by divine retribution, and it was God finished him. Which gives you an idea what kind of a guy he was. Okay? Reminiscent of an omniscient pool ball, Johnson bounced one fallacious theory off another. Russian commies, Fidel Castro, little Vietnamese assassins, the CIA, the FBI, the Secret Service, mafia enforcers, divine retribution, with little or no substance to support his allegations. But he managed to keep most serious suspicions from his own door, and he stalled any meaningful investigations into his closest allies. Johnson never cited the controllers of the motorcade past the Texas School Book Depository, John Conley, Cliff Carter, Bill Moyers, J. Herrick Johnson, Eugene Locke, and other Dallas Citizen Council members, or Secret Service agent Forrest Sarles. He never accused those headed for prison via the Bobby Baker, Fred Korth, Billy Celeste's TFX scandals. He never cited RFK's sniffing around via the IRS of the Roy Cohn, Lionel Corporation, Permindex mob link snafu. And Roy Cohn was Donald Trump's mentor. Probably the most despicable lawyer in American history. Okay? Not that I'm taking sides. Anyway, or JFK's senatorial stockpile conspiracy investigation, or the Collins radio corruption case. He never referred to the dump LBJ rumors, or National Security Action Memorandum number 273 regarding Vietnam, or the oil depletion allowance and diverse tax loopholes, or the Federal Reserve System overhaul considerations at work. He never initiated discussion into the murders of Henry Marshall, George Krudeleck, Harold Orr, Howard Pratt, or Alfred Novak, or the suspicious deaths of Cliff Carter, Josepha Johnson, LBJ's sister, Sam Smithwick, or George Parr. He never named the Del Charo set, the Clint Murchison, Bedford Wynn, D.H. Byrd, Gordon McClendon oil clip, which could influence any individuals, any organizations, and any agencies needed to perpetrate and cover up any crime, including a presidential assassination. He never pointed a specific finger at the specific owners of the physical evidence in the case, James Rowley's Secret Service henchmen or J. Edgar Hoover's minions. And sadly, absolutely no one with any real authority or impact, including the government, the media, and the researchers, excluding a select few perceptive amateur sleuths and some of them are in this building, follow the money, the profits gained by Johnson and his affluent cronies from 1963, and it's linked to the present day profiteering. And like a ping pong match, the critical community and the establishment have taken turns sparring with each other, trying to convince the American public of their agenda. But virtually nothing concrete is accepted as a verity. Every allegation is eventually contested, and every individual's credibility is undermined. Only one undeniable factor has remained constant: the ticking of the clock. The conspirators and their heirs and the corporate mass media propagandists have won the game of time. Prove, disprove, debate, counterattack, misinformation, disinformation, instilling doubts, allowing controversy to stumble along. Tick-tock, the Warren Commission, the HSCA, the National Academy of Sciences, Failure Systems Analysis, JAMA, Norman Mailer, the ARRB, Gary Mack, Dave Perry, the disgraceful tandem of David Bellin and Gerald Ford against Oliver Stone, Gerald Posner, Max Holland, John McAdams, David Von Payne, Vincent Bugliosi, TikTok, the infiltration of incessant trolls on JFK blogs and websites, and the various ignorant prevaricators managing podcasts on the internet. TikTok, the limited hangout crews, namely the self-righteous and arrogant CIA did-it-alone crowd, or the short-sighted mafia did-it-alone supporters. TikTok, all beneficiaries of the diversionary tactics of Lyndon Baines Johnson and the sleazy creeps who have followed in his footsteps through the decades of incessant deceit. The only person who allegedly ever heard the truth from LBJ was Madeline Brown, his mistress of 21 years, who heard him personally growl, "It was Texas Oil and those fucking renegade intelligence bastards in Washington." And even then, he neglected to include himself. Thank you. And these people that are trashing Madeline Brown, it's easy to trash a dead person, isn't it? Unless they deserve it. Madeline Brown called me her adopted Yankee son, and I'm proud of that. And I had one other thing I'd like to read about her. I think it's appropriate, because I think it's, I wasn't there. They said these people, especially the people in the other conference, saying there was no Murchison party. What are they going to do with Mae Newman, the nanny? It's in the Guilty Men. If you've never seen the Guilty Men, see me later. I can take care of some people here. Okay? All right? I have various other presentations I have available. At any rate, that little old lady's not lying on the Guilty Men. Hoover was there. And they had champagne and caviar parties the whole week. Not only that, there's a guy named Nick Principe. He was a Washington Police Park policeman, some sort, motorcycle guy. And he said Johnson and his boys were all partying up in the White House that night. And there's a lady in the back that might be able to tell you something about a particular policeman here who went up with to the Cavills. Stan Weaver talked about it. Earl Cavill went up to his brother's house, Charles Cavill, who was fired by Kennedy for the Bay of Pigs. And when he went in, the story is, and again, it's one of those things where, I don't know the guy. He told people all the generals and admirals were in there partying. Well, there you go. You got the Pentagon boys partying, you got Johnson partying, and you got the oilmen partying. You don't need too many more. And of course, Hoffa's going, Bobby's just a lawyer now. So, take the pick. Anyway, let me read this to you, and then let me know how much time I got there. 10, okay? And I'll try to do a few things here. I have 3 hours worth of stuff, and I just...
Talk faster!
I'm going to sound like the chipmunks. In the 1990s, British researcher Ian Griggs, the editor of the informative JFK assassination magazine, the Dealey Plaza Echo, interviewed Sherri Angel, a former Jack Ruby stripper, on November 19, 1994, the transcript of which was published in the Echo in November of 1999. As the interview was winding down, Griggs asked one last formal question. Why did Jack Ruby shoot Lee Harvey Oswald? Sherri whispered, because he was told to. Evidently surprised, Griggs asked, you honestly believe that? It wasn't this thing about saving Jackie? Some believe Ruby's motive was to save Jackie from suffering through the ordeal of a mortar truck. Sherri replied, Lyndon Johnson had it done. Johnson? Repeated Griggs. Sherri continued, I'll always believe that with all my heart and soul. Did you notice the motorcade? Jack Kennedy did not have one security guard riding on his car. Johnson's was filled with them. I'll never believe anything else. And I have seen Jack Ruby and President Lyndon Baines Johnson together in this same hotel where we are right now. Griggs clarified her response. In the Adolphus Hotel, here on Commerce Street? Sherri said, yeah, me and Madeline Brown saw them. Griggs asked, when was that, Sherri? Sherri answered, that was before the assassination. Griggs attempted to clarify the information again. So you're saying that before the assassination, here in the Adolphus Hotel in Dallas, you saw Jack Ruby with the vice president? Sherri said, H.L. Hunt, W.O. Bankston, all these people. A lawyer, I forget his name, and Lyndon and Madeline was with me. Griggs repeated, Madeline Brown. Sherri said, she was still in love with him, with Lyndon. She told me to come over here. I didn't know what was going on over here. Griggs asked her, about when was this, Sherri? How long before the assassination? Sherri answered, probably about 3 or 4 months before the assassination. Once I read the interview, I phoned Madeline on June 8, 2000 for her reaction. She admitted that Jack Ruby and Lyndon Johnson both visited the Adolphus Hotel on many an occasion, but she never saw them together, and she was not the woman identified in Sherri Angel's story. Whether Sherri's story holds merit minus her one error or not is an unresolved mystery unto itself, but the interview does demonstrate Madeline Brown's integrity in action. While she would not have been surprised to learn that Ruby and Johnson had met in 1963 at the Adolphus Hotel at some point, she was never a witness to such an event. Madeline Brown could have lied to falsely enhance her credentials for self-promotion, but that wasn't her style, at least not with my personal dealings with her. Was Madeline Brown perfect? A role model for young women to emulate? Of course not. She loved the aristocratic party scene, and she was no doubt a live wire with an impish laugh and a love for off-color jokes. She was a self-confessed procrastinator who rarely sent me books or documents when she had promised to mail them to me. Beneath her classy exterior lived a bundle of tragic flaws. She was a living contradiction of conflicting emotions. Her life was inundated with ambivalence. While she knew that her torrid law affair with Johnson, driven by lust, was immoral to the core, she could never resist the temptation to continue the tryst. Similarly, she disapproved of JFK's murder, yet she often admitted being excited by the fact that her lover was President of the United States. While she considered Kennedy's death a terrible act of treason, she also tended to defend her Texas Mafia associates, calling the plot a business decision. They did what they had to do. Her internal wavering about love versus lust and sin, and murder versus loyalty to her friends often surfaced in our conversations. On one occasion, I had criticized George Bush the Elder for giving a lackluster and superficial speech. I told Madeline, they're all crooks, but do they have to bore us to death too? As an afterthought, I said, I'll give LBJ some credit. He was second only to Hitler in evil, but I guess he wasn't boring. Madeline squealed, oh no, Ed, he was a lot of fun. I can still, one researcher who's going to be speaking here this week, and I won't name him, he met me and she was caught forging a will of a relative to get money. And she was convicted in a court, and then it went to, I believe, an appeals court, and she got off because it was a lawyer who signed it. And so she got off. But of course, there are people who say, well, that's the end of her credibility. She tried to steal money from somebody. And when he said, what about that? And I said, what kind of woman do you think spent 21 years with Lyndon Johnson? And he looked at me and said, that's profound, Ed. She loved attention and she loved to gossip. She would often discuss rumors and hearsay about the assassination with me, and I would caution her not to relay to others such information because they might believe she was the source, and if any of it was not accurate, others would exploit it to damage her credibility. She would always say, okay to me, but Madeline was carefree and sometimes careless. Could it be possible for her to embellish a story for dramatic or romantic effect? Sure. Would she invent the story outright? I don't think so, but I can't offer any guarantees. It is certainly plausible that she would omit details to keep me in the dark about certain unsavory acts in her past, such as her affair with Jerome Ragsdale. Yes. Was she ever sexually intimate with her? Excuse me, I'm skipping a line here. Was she ever sexually intimate with Jerome Ragsdale? Yes. Was she ever sexually intimate with Billy Solestes? That unsubstantiated rumor has reached me from different sources residing in Texas. Whoever knows the truth has never gone public. Did she have possible ulterior motives to fabricate any of her allegations? Possibly. There is little doubt in my mind that LBJ was the father of Stephen Mark Brown, whose photographic resemblance to Johnson is pretty convincing in its own right. With the termination of LBJ's financial arrangements after his death in 1973, then Madeline possessed a powerful motive to incriminate all of them, Johnson as well as Ragsdale and Kellum, whom she felt was pocketing their money for themselves. to destroy their reputations for leaving her and Stephen penniless. However, would she fabricate such an elaborate story and immerse her son in a fraudulent scheme for such motives? Would she allow Stephen Mark Brown to confront such a public pain, anguish, humiliation, and rejection to gain revenge or notoriety or wealth? For a dozen years, I experienced vicariously the agony which she had endured and relived whenever we discussed her son's final ordeal. Madeline Brown might have enhanced her story for social acceptance in certain strategic ways, but it is difficult to accept the wholesale fabrication of her horrifying tale, which some lone assassin promoters have alleged. So I tried. I tried to put it in perspective. I wasn't there. I don't know if Lyndon Johnson said those things to her. So you have to make up your mind. I tell that Lone Ranger story, probably almost out of time, but some of you may not know the Lone Ranger story, so I'll tell it, I guess, as a finale. He says, I've got 5, it'll take 2 minutes to do this. David Letterman had Jay Thomas, a comedian, on his show a number of times, and he used to tell the story over and over and over again, and he used to embellish it. But it was basically, he was a disc jockey, a rock and roll disc jockey, and he was a little white guy with big afro. And he had a partner that was very tall and thin and had hair down on his rump. And they were hired by a used car lot to help sales on a weekend. And they also hired Clayton Moore, the Lone Ranger, to be there. And every chance they got, whenever there was a break, they went out in the back hall and started smoking spliffs. And by the end of the day, they were blitzed. He called it herbaling up. Okay? So someone was supposed to bring a limo to pick up the Lone Ranger, bring him to the local Holiday Inn or whatever, and it never showed up. So these two bozos said, well, we'll take you. So they get in his Volkswagen, a little shitmobile, filled with hamburger wrappers and everything, and the Lone Ranger gets in the back, stoic as hell, with his mask on, the whole outfit, and they're driving down, and they get caught in traffic in the expressway. And the guy in front of them backs up and smashes the front of his car and drives down the breakdown lane. So they go, and he decides to go chase him. So they chase him down, and they go off an off ramp, and they get to a red light, and he jumps out of his car, he opens the door, drags the guy out of the car. He said, you son of a bitch, you smashed my car. He said, no, I didn't. He said, yes, you did. He said, well, what are you going to do about it? I'm going to call the cops. He said, go ahead. Who do you think they're going to believe? Me or you two stoned hippie freaks? And the Lone Ranger stepped out of the car and said, they'll believe me, citizen. And that's what it's all about, people, is credibility. Joan Mellon, in her book, found Matt Wallace's kid, who was 13 when Henry Marshall was killed and 16 when President Kennedy was killed. And the kid says that Malcolm Wallace was home in California on those days. Maybe it's true. But since Joan wants to believe it, it's true. But she'll also tell you Madeline Brown is lying about what Lyndon Johnson and she talked about. Because she doesn't want that to be true. You can't do that. If you're going to be objective, you have to say, there's some things we're just never going to know. You have to decide for yourself, which Lone Ranger story is more likely. Thank you very much.
Give a round of applause, please. You're very kind. Thank you.
Someday my grandsons will see this and say, Pa wasn't a doofus at all.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, if I could have your attention for just a moment, we're going to go ahead and take time for dinner. But what we need to do is we need to go ahead and lock the doors. You can go ahead and leave your notebooks and things if you wish. And we're going to come back and restart at 7:45. We'll open the doors at 7:35.